And now it's time to join John Walters for the final episode of Soap Suds. Today, he looks at soaps that die, starting with a soap that was resurrected in a different form by Victoria Wood. Even those of you who won't remember Crossroads will surely know Acorn Antiques.
Hello? I thought you'd committed suicide. Okay, see you later. It was my so-called husband. Not dead at all. He says, put the triplets in their body warmers. He's taking us all to Manchester for the zoo, if you please.
Oh, it was just a cry for help, Miss Babs. Otherwise, why try and slash your wrist with an electric razor?
She may be able to find my thermos, but will she ever find her twin brother?
Well, all I know is his name's Derek, and there's a handyman in an antique shop.
Derek? That's your name, isn't it, Derek?
Well, yes, Miss Babs.
And this is an antique shop? And you're a handyman? Oh.
I must be Miss Bertha's twin brother then, Miss Babs.
Yes. Run along and tell her, Derek.
I've come out now to a little village called Assington, near Sudbury in Suffolk, and I've come to a place called, perhaps this will give you a clue, Acorn Antiques. It's a big antique, storage room. It's not really a shop. It's a bit too big for that. And the reason I've come here is there's a chap called Peter Kingsman runs it, and he is, well, one of the great Crossroads fans. There's no point denying that. And as I look through the window there, not only are all these bits of antique furniture, there's the Crossroads sign, or it looks like it, Crossroads Motel. Let me go in. Peter. I assume it's Peter. Hello.
Good afternoon.
John Walters. Hello.
Hello.
I saw the sign through the window. I've been told you had it. Now, this is the real Crossroads Motel sign, is it?
Yes, the original one that was used right from the very beginning in 1964.
Crossroads Motel, bar, restaurant, swimming pool, open to none. Then it should say residents, but the second E's dropped off and
flew off on the motorway going to Birmingham in November.
Where did you get it then? To hold the actual sign. It's about 4 feet high. It's a good solid lumpy thing.
It was sold off when everything was sold from the programme in '88, when Biddle and Webb in Birmingham sold it off. And here, at least other people can see it and see what it is. I did actually have a customer come in about a few weeks ago and said to me, oh, excuse me, can you tell me where the swimming pool is? And I thought he was joking, but he was quite deadly serious. He obviously didn't know anything about Crossroads.
Would you sell it to me, Peter?
No, I certainly wouldn't.
Oh, why not? You put it in an antique shop. It's almost an antique, a Crossroads sign.
Yes, it's 30 years old. No, I wouldn't sell that. It's a bit of television history, that.
It's surprising the number of soaps that have passed into broadcasting history. There's Crossroads, of course, even if it is still with us largely through reruns of Victoria Wood's Acorn Antiques. Then there was United, the gritty football soap that tried to lift Brentwich Football Club from the bottom of the second division 30 years ago. The BBC soon relegated it. But did I ever see it? And Compact, that chronicled the hopes, fears, laughter, tears in the offices of a woman's magazine. I remember that. It had a fat girl in it. And what's this the theme to? Diddy, daddy, bum, dee. I know! Albion Market, that chronicled the hopes, fears, laughter, tears in a market. Eldorado, Citizens, Waggoners Walk. Hopes, fears, laughter, tears in a walk. Glyn Dearman was Waggoners Walk's first producer. And strangely enough, it seems Waggoners' birth came out of the death of the Dales.
When Radio 1 started and Radio 2 took over from the Light programme, Robin Scott, who was then controller, said he felt that after 21 years, it was time the Dales were killed off because Dr. Dale was way past his retirement age, and we were stuck with a vast variety of characters that we couldn't really get rid of, and we'd really done everything that we possibly could with all of them. So what we basically did was to replace the genteel clink of china teacups in the afternoon as Mrs. Dale and her family had tea with the clink of milk bottles first thing in the morning being knocked over by somebody staggering back from an all-night party.
I'm back. Home with the milk, literally.
Just for a change?
Oh, going to work on an egg.
Mm-hmm. Do I detect a note of disapproval?
What happened this time? Missed the last two?
How'd you guess? I could have got a lift with some lechy lawyer in an E-type jag, but I know what that would have meant, a fight to the death on Hampstead Heath. And frankly, I didn't feel up to it.
So?
I plumped for a solitary sofa in South Ken. Satisfied?
Was it a good party?
Well, it wasn't the orgy to end all orgies. No hanging from the curtain rails or passing on the pot, but it was fun while it lasted.
Tracy, who's going to carry the can if anything happens to you?
We chose Hampstead deliberately because it's got a movable population. We did not want to have a situation where we were stuck with a family and a group of characters that we had to stay with indefinitely. And Robin Scott said, I don't want the programme to run for more than 2 years. I don't want a long-running soap opera. The main philosophy behind Waggoners Walk was to be more realistic than the Dales had been. Our characters could have arguments. They could slam doors. They could become involved in heated issues that would create possibly a heated response from the audience. That was good.
But if there was such a heated response from the audience, why was the BBC response to it ultimately so cool?
Basically, Radio 2 did not want to carry a soap opera anymore. The audience figures were good, but they kept changing the times of transmission for both the morning and the afternoon episodes. And they changed them so frequently that listeners, I think, became confused about what time they were going out. And when the audience are confused, they then basically give up. The result was very quickly a healthy audience diminished. And I am sure it was the change in the transmission times that did it. I mean, to my mind, Waggoners Walk was never a failure because it was only going to run for 2 years. That was the absolute maximum we were going to run. It ran for 10 years. I think of Waggoners Walk as a success.
But it's no longer with us, and neither is Citizens. Remember them? I asked director Clive Brill, the man at the helm for its final months, did he think of Citizens as a success?
To me, I mean, looking back on it, and at the time, it seemed like an absolute recipe disaster. I mean, that Radio 4 was rather keen to get some younger audiences in and prove that it had younger audiences. And so it came up with this marvellous idea of taking 4 or 5 students fresh out of university and sticking them in one house. But who really cares what 5 spotty students do in a house?
What have you done?
Here's your bag, Jules. What have you done to it?
Don't say a word.
No, it looks great.
No, it doesn't.
What were you trying to do?
I thought I'd try some highlights.
Well, how long did you leave it on?
I was in a hurry and I misread the instructions on the packet.
So it turned into floodlights.
No, I think it looks great.
Oh, I don't know what they're going to say at work.
Well, they're going to put you on the leather department.
Oh, it's not funny. We have continual assessment, you know. These things are noticed.
Well, if you've got it, then flaunt it, honey.
Well, I don't have any choice.
Well, I had to identify what I thought was wrong with it. I thought it was deeply wrong that every character lived in the same building, you know, sort of. And I thought we needed to open it up, both in terms of the range of characters, the age range. More importantly, I was and always have been a great fan of Coronation Street. And Coronation Street makes me laugh. Citizens never made me laugh at the time. So I brought in a bunch of writers and I said, look, this is a social comedy, write gags and make the characters laugh a bit more. And I like to think that it became a lot funnier. Sometimes it was ridiculous and stupid, but I think it started to raise smiles.
But why do you think it went then? Was it because the public just weren't that interested in it, or was it the old BBC conspiracy theory? And
I'm afraid I do think it was the BBC conspiracy theory. I think once Michael Green had been hammered over the head enough by the press, I think he finally realised he couldn't, in all conscience, stand up and support it anymore. But obviously, I think he was wrong. I thought we went out on a high, and certainly the postbag that we had at the time proved that there were loads of people out there who were loving it. I made a point of directing the last episode, and I was certainly in tears when Alex, who was, I think, the first voice in the series, said something along the lines of, let us all now escape into fairy dust. She was putting her child to bed and saying sweet dreams and let's go into another world. And I feel the tears rising even now as I think about it.
Here, Clive, use my hanky. So why do some soaps get launched like a rocket and end up as a piece of damp cardboard to be picked up from the lawn of life and thrown away into oblivion? Media studies lecturer Andy Medhurst, why do soaps die?
It's a complicated question. I mean, in Albion Market's case, it was a fairly straightforward scheduling failure, I think. It went out on a Friday and a Sunday. And that's a mistake, because that's 2 different weeks in people's minds. And the idea of tuning in Friday, tune in Sunday, kind of it messes around with people's sort of mental timetables. I mean, it could well have worked, but they didn't think about when to put it on television. The most spectacular recent failure is Eldorado, which again could have worked, but I think they overestimated how interested people would be in Europe. I think people's ideas of Europe are not that involved. People are not really that bothered about Europe as yet in this country as a setting for fiction. So having all these Swedes and Danes and French and Spanish, it was, again, a very politically correct sort of move to make, but I'm not sure that they thought about having an audience and regularly attracting a viewership.
More, considerably more, about the short-lived Eldorado later. The man who cranks soaps out for the Australian Grundy organisation is Reg Watson. Yet, while working in Britain, he created what some consider to have been a titanic television turkey.
It was genteel and deeply naff. That was the worst of it, really. It was the sort of the prissiness of it that I couldn't stand, and it was just awful, frankly. I mean, it was just dreadful.
But what was deeply naff to Nina Mishkoff was a life's work for Jane Rossington. She played in most episodes from the first to the last as Meg's daughter Jill.
I suddenly got a phone call from Reg Watson saying, would you come down and see us? And I was working at York in the theatre. And I hopped on a train first thing in the morning, got the day off rehearsals. Well, I sort of sneaked off rehearsals, and saw Reg. And he sort of implied that I'd be starting the next week, and I couldn't quite understand this. So I sort of arrived not knowing anything about it. And they said, oh, will you... 6 weeks? And I thought, well, yes, all right, 6 weeks. Might go on for a bit longer.
And it went on?
24 years later.
And you had the first line. Give us that first line again.
Crossroads Motel, may I help you? I did have bits out, though. And it was really only when I got married that I thought, well, I'll throw in my lot with this programme until it finishes. Everybody was saying it's going to finish, so I thought, well, it'll finish next year, so I'll just do it.
You make it sound like the First World War, Jane. You know, everybody's saying, it'll be over by Christmas.
Well, it was a bit like that. And, I mean, for years, people said it was going to finish.
But it went on and on, rather like the Black Death, but a little more light-hearted.
Could you hold on for another 3/4 of an hour or so?
Oh, I missed the fireworks.
All right?
Maggie, you all right?
I've had a tranquilizer, that's all.
That's not setting a very good example for your daughter.
If you've been through what I've been through the last couple of hours.
Like what?
Doesn't matter now.
Is that you or the tranquilizer talking?
To be truthful, the tranquilizer. I'll explain later. But first, I must see Jill. It's very important.
Well, she's out there somewhere at the bonfire.
Tell her to come to my room. It's urgent.
Yes.
Thank you, Ed.
Crossroads Motel, can I help you?
What was that you used to say about Crossroads was that the scenery moved more than the actors. And, I mean, I had to watch it professionally. I was a television critic between 1982 and 1987, so I actually saw the demise of Crossroads. I used to love it in some ways because, you know, it was, as I say, the inspiration for Victoria Wood's Acorn Antiques, but it was so funny. I mean, Benny, who was the really sort of stupid character who wore one of his daft woolly hats, I mean, he was once sent out for a spanner and didn't come back for 9 months. So the things like that were absolute joy to behold. It was a real treasure to see things like that. But, I mean, I wouldn't have watched it if I hadn't had to watch it professionally.
So why did Crossroads provide Nina with such treasures? Jane Rossington, alias Jill Chance again.
When we used to do it for the first 18 years, we'd start at the top of the show with scene 1, and we'd go through to whatever it was, scene 15, scene 16. We actually had a spare 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, so that if the first scene fell apart, like you opened the door and the doorknob came off in your hand, you could do it again, if you could get the doorknob put back on again in time. But after that, you didn't have any time, so whatever happened went out. And you just had to get... I mean, I once had the set catch fire on me in the midst of... I was doing a scene with Roger, quite an important sort of scene. We were having breakfast, put the toast on, turn around, carry on with the scene, sort of glanced out the corner of my eye, and my God, the toaster was flames. Well, I mean, you can't ignore that, can you? You can't just pretend it's not happening and carry on. But we didn't stop. We just said, good heavens, what are we going to do? Well, it was an electric fire. What do you do? Oh, we throw a blanket over. So we did a lot of that. And meanwhile, trying to say, what were you saying about Auntie Kitty? Desperately trying to get the plot in. And that was always the problem, because we didn't have the time. And that was wrong. I mean, it was always done on a shoestring.
And yet the programme limped on gamely till 1988. But there were those who predicted its doom years earlier.
I mean, the start of it really was I suppose, the axing of Noel Gordon in 1981, and they sent her off on the QE2. And Crossroads changed. It ran on. It went on another 7 years after she was axed, but it was never the same. I mean, she was Crossroads.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with head bowed low that we offer this humble little tribute to the First Lady of the land.
Noel, guess you missed the old motel. You're at the crossroads of your life, and we all wish you well, Noel.
Yes, the departure of Meg Richardson stroke Noel Gordon shocked many devoted fans. But sometimes it's not just the loss of a character, but a whole series. I called another devoted soap fan in Middlesbrough, but I called at the wrong time.
You do know that I'm missing Coronation Street right now. I've just switched off the
I'm terribly
telly.
sorry.
Well,
Terribly sorry. What a social gaffe. But Gwen Lamb's main role on the soap scene is as a supporter not of Coronation Street, but of Eldorado, about which she will talk very happily indeed.
He was an opportunity to see the life of expatriates living out in Spain, of which there are many now, and this was half an hour, 3 times a week, to be transported to Sun, Sea and Sangria, which we were promised, and I think it fulfilled all those promises, and I was really hooked on it.
But what did you do when you first heard the rumour that it might get the chop?
Well, I was absolutely horrified. I thought, here we are with all this publicity. They'd spent £10 million on setting up this soap. And after 9 months, it started in July 92. And by March 93, here we have a new bloke had just arrived at the BBC. Someone in charge of BBC One, the new controller, Alan Yentoff, and he announced it was going to be axed. I was absolutely horrified, having spent £10 million of our money. What this is all about is about accountability to the licence payer, of course. That's what this is all about, and this is the nub of the whole exercise.
Yeah, but come on, Gwen, you're just a humble fan. What do you expect? What did the professionals think? Over to Brookside's Phil Redmond. What was wrong with Eldorado?
I don't know. Well, have we got an hour? I suppose my overriding thought when I watched it, Eldorado, was like, how the hell did they get themselves into that mess, really? It's just simple things like, the sound acoustic problems weren't sorted. Things like they had young kids, young actors, and not done much before, and they were giving them the hardest things to do, and that was to walk in and out of scenes. It's, you learn all these things in your career. The hardest thing for any actor to be, whether it's De Niro or whatever it is just to be, things like that. I just felt, it's a real shame, because it was the right decision for the BBC to go, because they need something else apart from EastEnders. They need another raft in its channel, around which to sell the rest of the channel. To promote all the other, the remake programs that are on.
I hated Eldorado, I have to say, because the scripts were dreadful and the acting was awful, particularly amongst the youngest members of the cast. And initially, when it started up, you couldn't hear a damn thing they were saying because they had real sound, and they used to have sort of heels clacking on Spanish tiles, and everything was echoing, so you had to spend your life with your ear towards the set rather than your eyes. You think, what were they saying, Kate? And I thought it was absolutely appalling, and I thought it was quite right. It should have gone.
When a soap has to die, why do soaps die? Or is it different things all the time?
If the soap doesn't provide characters that really make you want to know what happens next, then that's the end of it.
Media Studies lecturer Andy Medhurst again.
I think it started too soon. There are rumours always floating around that it was rushed into production rather earlier than the production team would have liked, and the technical failures clearly were evident in the first few weeks. Some of the cast had clearly been hired for their sort of swimsuit potential rather than their acting abilities, which is always a drawback. And I think some of the plots took a long time to get going. The tragedy with Eldorado, as fans of it will tell you, is that it was getting very gripping and very interesting in its last 2 or 3 months. But by then it was such an embarrassment. The BBC was really sort of worried about its standing, its critical reputation, and in the way that EastEnders was one of their flagships, I mean, Eldorado was one of the Titanics and had to be got rid of.
And got rid of it was. Here are the last few seconds.
Things have turned out perfectly.
What?
Everything. You and me. Cheers.
But what about the bracelet? What was it doing in the car?
I must have dropped it.
And there was a boy in there. Who was it?
The same unfortunate so-and-so that stole my car, I guess. Bad note, Pilar. You can't trust anyone these days, can you?
You wanted freedom, I wanted you.
The last episode was transmitted on the 9th of July, 1993, in a vast explosion, sort of leaving it open-ended, with loose ends that could still be tied up, and there are still answers to questions that I want to know. I still want to know what happened to Marcus, Tandy and Pilar, and that dramatic, very ill-fated love story. And even though she was married to somebody else, it was the love story, the romance and the skullduggery was absolutely electrifying. Who caused a massive explosion on that final day? Did Mr. Big get rid of Marcus, Tandy? All these things I still want the answer. In other words, the BBC could pick up the threads if they just went out there and carried on filming.
Yes, Gwen, but you've got to admit, I could hardly hear what Pilar was saying in that last scene. But here's somebody whose association with Eldorado was even longer than Gwen's. Julia Smith, fresh from her success with EastEnders, was Eldorado's first producer. Julia, could it have worked?
It was beginning to work. When it was taken off, it was getting practically the same viewing figures as EastEnders was at the same time in its reign.
But did something go wrong at the start? I've even met a cameraman recently who said he worked on it. He said if only we'd have had 5 months or so more to
I got it on in 5 months. The area we were given to work in was a bare mountain in Spain. There was no water, there was no electricity, there was nothing. We built everything. We had to buy the cameras, we had to build the studios, we had to build the set, we had to manufacture the whole thing, and we did it. In consequence, I was, well, I mean, as you know, I had to leave because I was just physically totally exhausted. I wore myself down to absolutely nothing. But despite all that, within the few months it was on air, it sorted itself out, and the audience were beginning to really respond to it.
But if there was this response, why did it have to die?
I think the answer was probably political, but I don't know.
Do you think that perhaps the success of EastEnders had made you perhaps a little too confident that you could tackle this very difficult task?
No, I wasn't all that confident, but you have to be if you're in charge of something. I think both Verity and I should have just turned around and said, in no way, Jose. But...
Very appropriate.
But, you know, we didn't, and...
And Jose turned out not to be able to read the lines very well. I wonder, Julia, is in those awful hours before dawn where we all occasionally wake up and everything seems very black, I mean, do you look at it and think, well, it was my fault?
I think I contributed to it, probably, and I think I should possibly have been strong enough to just screamed and said, no, it can't go on. But having said that, you know, all the controllers, everyone saw it. If they didn't like it at the time, they could have said, we won't put it on. But they didn't. I think, looking back now, I went back to Spain about a year after I left, and I went up to that mountain, and I looked at the sets, and I looked round, and I thought, my God, what an achievement it was to do what we did in the time. And then I actually felt rather proud rather than the other way. Now, maybe that's wrong, but talking to a lot of the actors and everyone, we all sort of felt, well, we We almost did it. It was like wartime near miss.
Julia Smith there, making it sound a little bit like the charge of the Light Brigade. A noble gesture against insuperable odds, but ultimately a failure. Incidentally, Eldorado is back on UK gold. But sometimes dead soaps live on in other ways. 7 years after the death of Crossroads, Peter Kingsman keeps the flame alive. He's got a large collection of memorabilia, including copies of the Crossroads Chronicles, a fanzine which, despite the death of the TV series, continued the Crossroads story in written form, rather like a headless chicken running round the farmyard. Peter now reads from the last episode of this last echo of Crossroads.
Jill clutched the diary to her as a flood of tears rolled down over her cheeks. Over the fireplace was a photograph of Adam and herself on their wedding day in 1983. It had been hard at the time not having her mother at that wedding, but what joy when she saw her sitting at that table, their favourite table, at the roof garden of the hotel in Venice, and Adam had arranged it all. Dear Adam. Jill got up from the bureau and sank down into the settee, letting the diary rest in her lap. She looked around the familiar sitting room once more. In here, time could stand still or spin back into the past, she decided. Nothing had really changed. She closed her eyes, a contented smile curling on her lips. Any minute, it seemed to Jill, the door could open and Sandy would struggle in. Diane or Amy or Jane Smith would be in and out with the coffees. David would be hovering with papers and cheques. Carney would be at the window with a potted chrysanthemum. Shuey would appear with the menus. And Meg would be sitting there, calmly and motherly as ever, at her desk by the red phone.
Goodbye. I'll try to pretend. It's just the beginning. It's not the end.
But I'm sorry, Noel Gordon, it is the end. The end of Soap Suds, where we've looked at different aspects of soap, going right back to the 1930s and young Widder Brown, through to today and Castles. There's one we've not mentioned. And me and my wife have started to watch it every Sunday and Monday on BBC One. We've got hooked. But there are rumours in the papers that it may become another soap that died. I asked a BBC spokesperson who said the controller of BBC One, Alan Yentob, will be making a decision at the end of the month. I seem to have heard that before.
Soap Suds was presented by John Walters. The producer was Claire Jones. Radio 4, it's 10:30. Now it's time for Woman's Hour with Jenny Murray.